Hello, my name is John for Through the Eyes of George. Today I'd like to talk to you about the Native American Indians and George Washington. Washington had a lot of interactions with the Native American Indians, and some people have said that George Washington is one of our greatest presidents. To some extent, I concur with that statement. But you ever hear the phrase hindsight is 2020? How can we say that George Washington could have done better in his interactions with the Indians if he did not have the historical perspective that we have now? George Washington did his best in his interactions with the Native Americans with the knowledge that was available to him at that time. So in this video, I'll go through a couple interactions George had in his life, and my sources will be in the description below. So in 1753, George Washington was tasked by Lieutenant Governor Dinwiddie to go from Williamsburg to Fort Le Bluff. And this right here is the journal that George Washington wrote down when he got back after his journey. Now, the reason why he went to Fort Le Bluff is because there was a land discrepancy. The French were claiming parts of the like Pennsylvania, Ohio Valley area, and the British were saying, no, that's not yours. So George Washington, along with Christopher Gist, Gist, who was a guide, and then some others, embarked on a treacherous journey with harsh weather and rough terrain. George Washington interacted with the Native American Indians on his way there and on his way back. Some of the Native American Indians he met were the Half King and also King Shanifs, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he also interacted in his life with the Senecas, with the Cherokees, with the Chickasaws, and the Iroquois. But anyway, on his way back, George Washington reported that St. Pierre, in his letter that Washington gave to Lieutenant Governor Dinwiddie, that he was impressed by Washington and that basically, no, we're not going to leave. But anyway, like I said, this journal here, George Washington wrote down when he got back. And this right here essentially made George Washington a celebrity. This was published all over Europe and all over the colonies. It made him like Washington kind of like a celebrity, like famous, I guess. I don't know how else to say that. So after that, a few months later, in 1754, George Washington, in a small skirmish, interacted with some Indians and the French, and pretty much started the French and Indian War on accident. So that happened. So he interacted there, and I don't want to do a 25 or 30-minute video, so I'm trying to get to the salient information. And if you want to know more about George Washington's interactions in a whole perspective with the Native American Indians, a book I highly suggest is The Indian World of George Washington. Amazing, very amazing. Anything you'd want to know about George Washington and his interactions with the Native American Indians. So when George Washington was president, though, he had or tasked Anthony Wayne, Fort Wayne, Indiana, which that's named after him, to go on an expedition or a mission which involved interacting with the Indians. Now, George Washington wasn't perfect in interacting with the Indians. He didn't have the historical hindsight or historical 2020 vision that we have today to look back and be like, oh yeah, that was kind of bad. George Washington didn't have that, but we do today. So if we know better today, then we should do better. If we know better, then we should do better today in 2019. Now, George Washington spent a lot of time in the wilderness. And if George Washington were alive today, he would absolutely be for a national park service, some kind of thing where you protect the beauty of the national landscape. And George Washington would also be for some kind of national Department of Interior to some degree. And the reason I say that is after I read Peter Stark's Young Washington, I came to that conclusion. To the degree that the National Park Service and the Department of Interior is now, I don't know if George Washington would totally agree with that, but Washington would agree with protecting the wilderness and the lands and the beauty of this country that we live in. Beyond that, I don't know what that would look like or how you would fund that or anything like that, because there's no information on that. But going back to George Washington and the Native American Indians, George Washington acquired land, real estate, I guess you could call it, for himself. Some of those lands were Native American Indian lands through treaties and agreements. And if George Washington were alive today, in terms of how we would interact with the Native American Indians, he would want peace. He would ask the question, in one way or another, what can we do now to have peace? What have you learned from the past, from when I was around in the 1700s? What was good, what was bad, and then what can you do now? You know, some things you can't repair, and some things you can. But what can we do now? You know, I don't know what else to say. Attitude would be a big thing that George Washington would talk about. Where is your attitude? Beyond that, I don't know. There's really nothing else to say about that. Those books that I showed you are fascinating, telling stories about George Washington. Again, I'll put all of that in the description below. And thank you for watching this video, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.